this is what we did in Abingdon, in the centre. In COVID time, a lot of things weren't possible, but with a lot of thought between us, we marked the coming into effect of the treaty in the market square. We had individual actions of banners and the ringing of bells by individual members. This is still in our market square, which is truly the heart of our town. And that was shared as far as we could on social media, so that it wasn't just the impact of the vigil itself that we were there in silence, but with clear messages for those who passed, but also that it could be spread as far and wide as we could. A variety of ways of giving the essential message of the illegality. They've always been immoral, but now they are illegal. And that was the simple, clear message we wanted to spread as far as we could.
Just say some of the arguments that I use that I think are quite effective. We have in our window, in our living room here, we've got a sign. It's about 2 A4 sheets, and it simply says on it, "Bin Trident, fund the NHS." Now that is something that actually registers with people, because I'm for one, but there must be many people, some of you lot here, are waiting for medical attention, but you're not getting it because of the problem, the COVID problem at the moment. And yet we can spend 205 billion on nuclear weapons. Now, ordinary people don't know that yet. It's not talked about. I have yet to see it in the local papers, complaints about funding of the NHS, plenty, but not linking it to the enormous amount of money that's being spent on nuclear weapons. So that's one argument that I use quite frequently, and I think it's very helpful. Another one is to recommend you to Stanislaus Petrov. Nod if you've ever heard of Stanislaus Petrov. Would you nod if you've heard of him? No, somebody's heard of him. Well, that's one or two have heard of him. He's a critical man for our argument. In 1983, he refused to do what he should have done according to Soviet orders, and ordered the minister in Moscow ordered to fire nuclear weapons back because they thought they were under a nuclear attack, and Petrov refused. Now, we have no idea how many accidents, miscalculations there were. It's not an argument we bring up often enough, and I think it's a very important one indeed. We should bring it up all the time. And finally, I suppose, I'd like to mention the fact of the missiles that I've got I share a little car, Morris Minor of some sort, and we drive off and we call it an independent car. But we wouldn't call it independent, would we, if we had to borrow the wheels from a neighbor half a mile away? And that's exactly what we're doing all the time with nuclear weapons. We can make the warheads and the missiles with American help, but we don't make the missiles, and we have to borrow them from the United States. And to talk about an independent nuclear weapon, which is what Boris Johnson and all that love doing, is ridiculous. It's not independent. It's wholly dependent on one of the major superpowers. And I think, therefore, this country is best placed to take the first step towards nuclear disarmament. I think that's about 5 minutes from me. Nobody's gone to sleep yet. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to see. I'm going to stop now and say that there's plenty of things for lots of us to do with a bit of imagination to turn public opinion, because public opinion is what moves governments. It's no good just telling the governments to do things. You've got to have a public opinion on your side, and that's why I think it's so important to take some basic steps. Thank you all so much for listening. You can wake up now, everybody who went to sleep. Now, I can switch this thing off now.
Bruce, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for starting us off. for a consideration of what the treaty means and then what we can do arising from it to move our own government. John Gittings, welcome to you. Would you like to share your thoughts and inspirations and suggestions and reflections on where we are post the coming into effect of the treaty?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. I told Sally and Mike I was going to talk about nuclear exceptionalism. They looked rather blank. But I'd like to explain, because I think it's very relevant to the treaty and how we should respond to it. I'm very glad Bruce mentioned Petrov and also the number of nuclear near misses which we know about and the other ones we don't know about, because one of the things really I'm thinking a lot about at the moment is why we as individuals, as societies, as governments, and particularly as military and political elites, why we miss or why we ignore the warning signs. And of course, we're very familiar with COVID exceptionalism, because that's why the British government, for example, took months to agree that we should wear masks, which they've been doing in Asian countries. I came from Hong Kong last year, as a matter of course. So COVID, and we continue to say that we're different from other countries, and we've, of course, as the rich nations as a whole have adopted a very similar attitude towards climate change until recently, saying, well, it doesn't really concern us so much, or it only concerns the future, not now. But applying it to nuclear exceptionalism and the treaty, there are three areas which I'd like to focus on, which I think have been highlighted by the treaty to the disadvantage of the nuclear powers who try to maintain the status quo. The first form of exceptionalism is to do with the possession of nuclear weapons. It's the most obvious one. We can read out a list of 150, 60, 70 countries which don't have nuclear weapons, but there are 5 which do, which claim, although it's a dodgy claim, that they're justified by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So India and Pakistan are sort of half accepted into the club. Israel, nobody ever mentions. Everyone else is a bad thing. So our weapon, I mean, this is so obvious, we say it all the time. Our weapons are not a danger, but if anybody else had nuclear weapons, they would be. We need them to protect ourselves. They don't. That's the most obvious form of nuclear exceptionalism. The second one is highlighted by the treaty again. It has to do with WMD. Now, WMD covers chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. But again, the position adopted by our government and by all the nuclear states in opposing the treaty is that nuclear weapons should not be proceeded against in terms of international law in the same way as chemical and biological weapons. There are conventions banning both of those. They were strengthened. They go all the way back to Geneva in the 1920s, but they were strengthened to ban not only the use, but the possession of chemical and biological weapons. But the P5, the permanent 5, the 5 nuclear powers, banded together, remarkable display of unity. They banded together in opposing the treaty, and they are in effect denying that nuclear weapons should be treated as weapons of mass destruction on the same footing as chemical and biological weapons. And the third area, which is a little bit harder to explain, but I think is also very important too, has to do with making an exception with regards to long-term planning. So you think about our governments, and we ourselves, of course, too, but our governments plan ahead. They may do it well or they may do it badly, but they plan ahead for the economy, for health. The world as a whole planned ahead with the Millennium Goals. So we identify issues which are coming up ahead and we try to deal with them. As I say, we may do it well or badly, but that is the way we approach these issues. Nuclear weapons, they are different. I mean, apart from the pious hope, pledge, which all governments make, that we would like to see nuclear disarmament, in fact, we do not, there's no planning in order to reach that point. And in fact, Britain, and I have to say this was down to Tony Blair when he was trying to push through Trident Renewal, which he obviously succeeded in doing. If you read what the Minister of Defence says about our nuclear strategy policy, it rules out any intelligent forward planning in order to try to get rid of nuclear weapons. Because what we say now, or what we've said ever since Tony Blair put it forward, is what I call the 50-year rule. And it's very simply with this. We cannot tell what will happen in 30 or 55 years. Those are the words they use. We cannot tell what will happen in 30 or 55 years. We might in 50 years' time be threatened with nuclear weapons, therefore we cannot give them up. I mean, it is a logic, it's a catch. I'm not sure whether it's a logical absurdity or catch-22 or both. I think it's both. But it means that it absolves our governments of the need to think ahead realistically about how to get rid of nuclear weapons. Now, these three areas, I think, all are highlighted, as I say, by the treaty. And the arguments, and I think the treaty makes the arguments more vulnerable, more wobbly. And they are three areas on which we can focus when we are attacking government policy. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And as a distinguished former journalist in The Guardian, we very much welcome your contribution tonight, as we have done Bruce already. We also joined here by Linda and Bucky from America, and they are the two speakers from the Appalachian Peace Education Centre. So we'd be very grateful for your observations from the American viewpoint and local campaigning, and just generally the perspective from America rather than UK. Bucky or Linda?
Okay, I will start first. Linda's going to tell you about some of our work against nuclear weapons. I thought I might start by saying a few words about the Appalachian Peace Education Centre. Some of you may not have even heard of us. APEC started in 1982, about the same time you all did, I believe, in reaction to the nuclear freeze movement. Because our hometown is Abingdon, Virginia, we early on developed a sister relationship with the Abingdon Peace Group, and so I'm really glad to be here today. We've continued until today to work to eliminate nuclear weapons, but early on, even a year or two after we got started, we expanded our mission to address other peace issues, including our government's military interventions and wars, as well as justice issues. Here are just a few things we've been involved in. We established the first environmental organization in our region. We developed a project to welcome Mexican migrants to our area. We developed the first support group for LGBTQ persons in our region. And we've worked for racial justice in the area. We started the first Martin Luther King celebration 35 years ago in our region. In fact, our major focus this past year has been on racial justice. After the murder of George Floyd, we organized a vigil and a march in Abingdon and joined with other local groups to advocate with our schools and our police and our prosecutors to improve their policies around equity. And we also advocated for changes in state law, mainly in Virginia, where we had a chance. I'm laughing because poor Linda's in Tennessee and there's not as many opportunities there. But in Virginia, we've seen major changes in laws around racial justice and equity. Most exciting for me is the abolition of the death penalty in our state, just about to happen. I also want to tell you about our neighboring peace organization that we work with and partner with, the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance. You've probably heard of Oak Ridge. It's where the atomic weapons were first built in World War II. Oak Arepa has been witnessing against the manufacture of nuclear weapons in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for over 20 years with weekly vigils. And about 3 years ago, when our government decided to restart the manufacture of nuclear weapons and to rebuild the existing buildings in Oak Ridge, Arepa sued them in our courts over environmental issues, and they've been successful. So far, they've been successful in halting the plans for construction. They've also been one of the leaders in our country in responding to the new UN treaty. And in our chat, I've copied 3 sites. They're all their website, but one of them is just their site. And one is a page of resources on the treaty that they, along with other groups in the country, put together. And you all might want to visit that, which you all have, but they also have PDFs of banners and posters and things like that that you could use if you want to steal their ideas. And the third one is an announcement of a February 25th meeting, a national meeting like this meeting, to come together to talk about next steps after January 22nd. And I'm sure they'd love to have you all join the meeting if you would like to. Linda, go ahead and tell them a little bit about what we've been doing. Linda, by the way, has spoken at the United Nations in New York about anti-nuclear issues, and I'm real proud of the work she's been doing.
Thank you, Becky. Linda, you're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind words, Bucky, and thank you all for all the work that you're doing there. I have had the privilege of speaking at the UN during the negotiations for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in just a side event, and so I bore witness to the contamination that has been caused by the local company here called Nuclear Fuel Services. Now, Nuclear Fuel Services gives us a tangible connection to your work there in England, because Nuclear Fuel Services is the sole provider of nuclear fuel for Navy submarines, which enables those Trident nuclear missiles to be deployed in the marine prong of the nuclear triad. So we have, I believe, a responsibility to work for disarmament here, to work against the operation and the continued contamination of our environment by nuclear fuel services, which we have proven to have the type of fuel that's used to power nuclear submarines for 95 river miles downstream of that plant. That same river is used as a source of drinking water for tens of thousands of our citizens here in Appalachia. So we've got a long-term concern about not only the local operations of nuclear fuel services here, but also the intent to get our country to plan, as was said before, for disarmament and to abide by Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, our recent actions have included, well, this was back last year on the 75th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We were privileged to have been given Hibakusha-made peace cranes, and a garland of peace cranes was sent to each of our elected U.S. officials in both Tennessee and in Virginia, along with a letter that urged our country to disarm, and also to specifically work on what we've got here is a modernization program for nuclear weapons. We're talking an obscene amount of money that is planned to be spent, over about $2 trillion over the next 30 years on nuclear modernization, that's being planned, but there's no planning for disarmament, but we're working on that. One of the other things that I do is I work together with the Sierra Club, because I'm a longtime Sierra Club activist, and we recently, and this is good news that not exactly earth-shaking, but the Sierra Club, being such a large and prestigious organization, environmental organization with a membership of over 1 million people in the United States, that has now decided that it's going to form a specialized nuclear weapons team to work with our activists to further advance the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and also to work on the individual projects that are currently in the works for new nuclear weapons, like the $100 billion that's being planned to be spent on new ICBMs. Now, I put in the chat a link to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists article on the planned ICBM. And one of the things that I found startling about that article was this whole specialist. She said, many consider American deterrence a success, pointing to the fact that no country has ever attacked the United States with nuclear weapons. This argument relies on the same faulty logic Ernie, that's the Muppet Ernie used when he told Bert he had a banana in his ear to keep the alligators away. The absence of alligators doesn't prove the banana worked. So I believe that we're seeing a fracturing of the so-called logic of deterrence when an arms insult, let's say, the theory of deterrence for what it is, that it's madness. It's madness and equivalent to Muppet logic. So those together with Appalachian Peace Education Center, those are, I guess, I keep it kind of in my mind, my secular work. And then I work with the faith communities. One of the other groups that I belong to is United Religions Initiative, which has a global presence. And we have a cooperation circle called the Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. Now, these folks, this group was formed by the president and founder of United Religions Initiative. His name is Bishop Bill Swing. He was the Episcopal Bishop of the entire state of California. This man was asked by the UN to form United Religions Initiative. And so he is very well connected. And these people are, and I'm like the no count, as we say in Tennessee, on the group. But it includes former ambassadors, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, God rest his soul, had been a member. Bill Perry, a former defense secretary. And so some of these high-powered people are, we're mobilizing those folks from the moral standpoint to push for disarmament. And we're also, and so we've produced a film, we've done a vigil, and the links to those are there. So I think that we've got, just in summary, we've got to push as many buttons as we can. The street protests that you had, demonstrations that you had in the middle of this town square, just fantastic. That needs to be done, and it is a wonderful way of doing public education. And as was said before, creating political will, as we would put it in the United States, is what needs to be done. However we do it, including Plowshares actions, God bless them for their courage. And so what I guess I'd like to close with something that the priest who blessed the bombs said. His name was Father George Zabelka. And in this, at the end of the speech that he gave to Pax Christi several years ago, and it was published in 2011, he said, "We must all become prophets." I really mean that. We must all do something for peace. We must stop this insanity of worshiping the gods of metal. We must take a stand against evil and idolatry. This is our destiny at the most critical time of human history, but it's also the greatest opportunity ever offered to any group of people in the history of our world to save our world from complete annihilation. So, with peace and joy, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Linda. That was inspiring and practical. You've highlighted so many key things there, using whatever networks we're part of, the importance of the faith communities, individual action, and those are kind of all those strands we need to be building on to move things forward. And to move our government and to create that groundswell out of which decision making by our own governments can come. Peter, can we welcome from Salisbury CND? Could you give us a brief overview of how it's seen, how the treaty and the actions coming from it are seen from your particular part of our country, Salisbury.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this discussion. I think we're all united in welcoming the ban treaty, as it does open up so many possibilities for bringing nuclear issues to the forefront of discussions, both nationally and internationally. I think we all share the view that the Non-Proliferation Treaty was really controlled by the nuclear armed states, and whilst paying lip service to nuclear disarmament, actually did almost nothing to advance that cause. The number of nuclear weapons in the world at the moment is quite crazy, and it allowing for the destruction of mankind if only a fraction of the arsenal is discharged, either deliberately, by miscalculation, or by accident. A recent estimate put the explosive power of the world's nuclear arsenal at 1.47 million times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. I think few of us could fail to be shocked to the core by that figure. Nuclear conflict is inherently indiscriminate, unable to differentiate between military and civilian targets, and incapable of being limited in its effects to the warring nations. All mankind would be threatened by even a limited nuclear exchange. The UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is a clear expression of the views of the majority of nations that the current situation is unacceptable and unsustainable. As Bruce said, chemical and biological weapons have been seen as unacceptable before, and now nuclear weapons join that tainted duo. Humanitarian considerations alone rule out such weapons for many of us. But the cost of nuclear weapons, again, as was mentioned from our friends in the States, is really a very, very major issue. In the UK, we're familiar with the estimated figure of £205 billion for Trident replacement. And as was said, America has just announced contracts of $13.3 billion for the design of a replacement intercontinental ballistic missile system to replace their current silo-based Minuteman III missiles. And that program envisages no less than 642 new missiles, with a capital cost of over $100 billion and a total lifetime cost of maybe $150 billion. And furthermore, the ICBM replacement is only one of 5 programs underway to so-called modernize the US strategic deterrent. The Congressional Budget Office estimate that the 4 others will cost an average of about $250 billion each. Far from enhancing security, these silo-based systems, which are inherently vulnerable to damage in a first strike, require the administration to be ready to fire on warning. That means the missiles must be fired before the anticipated incoming missiles from the enemy arrive. And this in turn implies that a very short decision time is available to consider the basis for taking action. As Bruce said, the amount of good that could be done with these enormous funds, were they diverted to medical services or social care or education, is staggering. The UK National CND has published a very good analysis of these potential benefits. In Salisbury, we've taken a great interest in the emerging evidence that what National CND has characterized as the romance between nuclear power and the military. It's becoming increasingly evident that we all pay a hidden military premium each time we pay our electricity bills. The military needs the civilian nuclear sector to ensure an adequate supply of nuclear expertise. We have a webinar in Salisbury planned that covers this area on February the 25th. Do join us if you can on that date, February the 25th. We have some excellent speakers, including both Dr. Andy Sterling and Dr. Phil Johnston from Sussex University. The webinar is entitled Zero Carbon, Why Not Nuclear? I think we'll all learn a lot from those discussions. Which brings me to my final point. The TPNW provides us all with the opportunity to build public awareness of the realities behind the apparently rather bland and simple term nuclear deterrence. We all need to be as informed as we can about the realities that lie behind nuclear weapons and nuclear power. Salisbury CND works hard to ensure that our website and Facebook page provide a convenient and up-to-date means of keeping abreast of developments in this field and of learning about forthcoming events. And actually, that's a very cooperative activity with Oxford CND and many other local groups who very kindly feed us much of that information. So I hope that you will visit the site, check out our news and events sections, and I hope you find it a useful and helpful resource. To find us, there is a link in the chat section, or you can just Google Salisbury CND. And you will be able to see the link to our Facebook page from there too. We all need to share resources and knowledge, both nationally and internationally. The impetus for change will have to come from us, the people, rather than being freely offered by politicians. It is down to us all to spread understanding of the situation, to emphasize the urgency with which it must be addressed, and to pressurize those in power to initiate change. We need to state clearly that nuclear weapons are immoral, and we are not prepared for our tax revenues to be squandered on systems that threaten our very existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your input there. I think it's, as you said, it's up to us to be as informed as possible and to use wherever we are placed and whoever we are connected with, in small ways and in larger ways, to actually create that change of culture, which questions constantly the need for nuclear weapons. The one thing that perhaps I would mention, which perhaps hasn't been mentioned, is the opportunity the treaty gives us by it being now contrary to international law to challenge both banks and pension providers and financial organizations on looking at the ethical policies which they have. It would seem unbelievable that they would be investing in either chemical weapons or biological weapons, but now it is contrary to international law. I think that's one specific route that individuals can take, but that's only one of the many. So perhaps we can open it up to anyone who would like to mention ways, which small or large, which we as individuals can help that movement and change of culture, and move our government in particular to sign behind the treaty. If anyone wishes to contribute, if they just raise their hand, and Sally and I will just keep an eye on the two screens. On screen, yeah. Or Rob.
Robin, unmute yourself.
Unmute myself first. I'm going to wait and see if anybody else spoke first, but I'm quite happy to say a few words. And for those who don't know who I am, I'm a bit of a cuckoo in the desk because I had 2 years as second in command of a Polaris submarine, including 2 periods in command, which makes me on the other side of the bridge from you, but I've crossed the bridge in my later years. I regret what I did, and I now, having studied for quite a few years now, the whole of the deterrence problem, which is a very complex one with a lot of detail and probably more than the average person can take in, I'm now firmly not a deterrent. What I've tried to do, and I have got a website with a simple address called whytrident.uk, which has some of my thoughts on. I set out first, I found out so many facts I didn't know, which changed my mind, which I tested them out on people here. And I can tell you Deddington is a very blue conservative territory full of very strong deterrers. Many people were surprised at the facts I gave them. So one of the things I've tried to do is to spread some real information to counter the misinformation that government puts out. And that's one of the things my website does. And I also have a Facebook, Twitter, and I talk and I write articles in naval magazines and generally try and convey the facts. And too many to talk about tonight. But I would support Bruce. I started off at, and I keep coming back to, one fact that you do need to win the battle is it's politics. You need votes. And people vote with their feet, and money moves feet. And the one thing that politicians react to is loss of votes. And if people think their money is being spent wrongly, then they start to think otherwise. So what you have to do is undermine their confidence in the message that the government is putting out. And a very simple thing, they say all the time that the dreadnought will cost 32 billion. Well, that's the estimate for delivery sometime in the 2030s. So they've given themselves a 10-year window, added 10 billion contingency to it, so it's actually 42 billion. And then there's another 20 billion at least on the warhead and all the ancillary work that goes with Trident. So 32 billion is actually 60 to 70 billion. And that's the first fact that people find quite interesting. The second fact is a simple one. I say to them, do you realize that the submarines on patrol 7 days a week, 365 days a year, keeping you safe, have not been targeted for 25 years because there has been no nuclear threat, and that the missiles are at about 3 days' notice to fire, which causes quite a lot of interest because nobody knows that. It's on a government website, but you have to know where to look. And if they're at 3 days' notice to fire, why are we keeping them at sea continually? Why aren't they operating like another naval ship and coming in at a harbour and being deployed when there's a crisis? And for instance, a submarine has just come off patrol, having had quite serious COVID problems on board during the patrol, having to isolate people. And I hate to think as a submariner how you go about that. And before they sailed, they landed a female sailor who had got COVID. And you have to say, what is the aim? No threat, missiles stood down, no nuclear warfare in the offing, no possibility of an instant strike, as we were told would happen, but I don't believe back in the Cold War. They could easily have not got on patrol. Remember the aim. And it's the fact that, just the fact we're developing a £20 billion program for a new warhead, of which 90% of it will be American, 10% will be British, but we're spending billions on setting up the Admiralty Weapons Establishment. So I find that facts actually are quite a good way to undermine trust in the government. And once you can start to undermine trust and pull a brick, then perhaps they'll start to listen to the bigger picture. And if you tell them that both Kennedy and Mountbatten, who are both big featuring people in the nuclear world, Kennedy was convinced that actually nuclear weapons were not the way to go. And had he not died, I think he would have embarked on a disarmament program. Mountbatten in his last years spoke openly in the House of Lords about how nuclear weapons were not the right way to go and we should be disarming. And then you turn to the open letter that ICANN generated, 56 statesmen from 20 NATO countries, 2 NATO secretary generals, all saying, sign the TPNW, because the NPT has been in force for 58 years and not a single disarmament measure has taken place underneath it. The NPT has become the big five's way of lawfully carrying on with nuclear weapons, because nobody can say, it doesn't say they will get rid of them, but they just have a way of not doing it. So I find the simple facts actually distributed around carry quite a lot of weight.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to contribute? Caroline.
I'd just like to pick up on what Rob has said about Mountbatten and Kennedy. They both met rather unpleasant ends, didn't they?
That's certainly, but perhaps it doesn't alter their well-expressed views.
Oh no, they expressed their views and then lost their lives for it, I think.
Mm. There's a great deal of sacrifices that so many people have made.
I'm referring to it, but there is a suspicion that the killing of Mountbatten was not too far removed from his anti-nuclear stance, is one of the theories.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to contribute at this point? Nigel.
Yes, one thing that might help all of us, for example, the Oxford City Council has signed an agreement to support the TPNW. So that might be something for those towns and cities where that hasn't happened, to continue working to see whether you can get your council to express support for the treaty.
Thank you. That's one very positive way forward. And so far as the Abingdon group is concerned, is increased engagement with Layla Moran, who may not have been able to join the meeting tonight, but the quiet, persistent engagement with her will be an ongoing process, and which can be replicated whatever political party one's MP is, whichever party they belong to. The other thing that struck me very much was the mention of the faith groups. I think it's in terms of influencing those who are looked to by many people. I thought it was a great sign of hope that Stephen Cotterill, who is now Archbishop of York, has moved the Church of England so firmly in the direction of supporting the TPNW, and also the Catholic bishops of England and Scotland. And I think anyone who has connections there, it's a question of encouraging them to take the lead and to congratulate them for making a stand, and which is not always applauded by all members of their own constituents, but wherever someone who is in the position to have a following, when they put their head above the parapet, as it were, to use a military metaphor, unfortunately, they are to be encouraged. There is, I think, letters of encouragement for those who who put their names to any movement to change that culture within society, and action trying to influence our own government is to be applauded. So even a letter of support is a small action, but small actions are as important, replicated many times, are as important, as significant as larger gestures. Anyone else who, Bruce? You're muted. Bruce, you're muted. You're mute.
Okay. That off?
Yeah.
That's
You
good.
don't have to belong to a community to go into their back church porch with a nice simple A4 sign and stick it. If you've got some drawing pins, stick it on the notice board. You don't need to have permission from anybody. Just do it, or stick it in your public library. You don't need to have anybody's permission. They may take it down afterwards. Well, too bad. You'll have had some effect while you're doing it. So don't be too hesitant about getting things out.
And also, if I can mention the leaflet which we produced from Abingdon, which folded over, it's actually folding it that way and laminating it makes a very good car sticker. And although cars aren't used very much at the moment because we're all in lockdown, it's again a way of taking the message with you wherever you are. It's a small thing, but sometimes when one is feeling perhaps what can I do, it's those small actions which at least add to that creating the groundswell which is needed. Anyone else who would like to contribute here? Bucky.
I was pleased to hear Linda talk about the Sierra Club, and I was thinking we struggle to try to involve young people in our organization, and if we can make the connection with environmental groups and with groups that are concerned about global warming, I think the connections are very obvious, and it's something that young people seem to be more passionate about, and maybe a way that if we can find ways to combine the two issues, to me they're easily combinable, and I hope we can do more of that.
Yeah. Linda.
To that end, the United Religions Initiative, this Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons group that I belong to, that is international, is going to make that connection because it's 100 seconds to midnight, in large part because of the nuclear threat and climate chaos. And so we're going to have a program on Earth Day or around Earth Day to bring together the youth who are working on both these issues, to have a dialogue, to have them understand that these are both existential threats to humanity and to the planet, and I hope that we're going to be able to join forces within the Sierra Club. That's also part of our plan. But it's like I said, it's in early stages to have a nuclear weapons team. But the Sierra Club, the National Sierra Club, is a member of ICANN and has the club's national policy has been to endorse the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and has had policy for disarmament for ever. It's just that we haven't exercised it, and that's the thing that we've all spoken about, and is wherever we are, we're at whatever forum we can bring this up, as was mentioned on church bulletin boards or in the libraries or on the street or in book clubs or wherever. We need to raise these issues, and especially during this I think this isn't just like Father Zabelkas had said. We've got an opportunity. We've got an opportunity during this COVID crisis. It's terrible to say, in a way, to exploit this horrible situation that we're all in. But just from that $100 billion that's about to be spent on these new intercontinental ballistic missiles, 3.3 million people could have their hospitalization in our country. We pay for our own, we don't have a national health system. So individuals, 3.3 million people could have their hospital stays paid for just for the cost of this one weapon system. 3.3 million Americans could get their hospitalization paid for if we weren't spending it on nuclear weapons. So I think, we've, and I just one more thing. I've got these little booklets, and it was mentioned because you mentioned Stanislaus before. A Plowshares booklet, Nuclear Weapons or Us, and I've got several left, and it includes the statement by Stanislaus about his decision not to launch, and if anybody wants it, send us your address, and we'll mail you some.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Bruce, would you began our the inputs. Would you like to be our final contributor to this gathering of suggestions?
Difficult to shut me up, isn't it? I keep talking. But could I just mention that those of us here in the United Kingdom, you should realize what an obstacle charity law is, because major charities are defined as to what they can do by the government, and they get great and very beneficial tax rewards as they stick to the rules. If they start taking on board issues like nuclear weaponry, they endanger their charitable status. And one of the problems in this country, the Justice and Peace Commission, is precisely the hesitancy about taking on issues like nuclear weapons and other military issues. So let's be naive. There are quite good structures in place to shut us up. So please make as much noise as you can in your own way.
Thank you, Bruce. Tony, finally.
Not God.
Sorry. Sorry.
This is a question rather than making any contribution. 51 people, 51 nations have signed for the treaty so far. What's going to happen next? Are there going to be another 50 signing up in a year's time? If they do sign up, how do we know? It's a way of sort of keeping our minds alert on this. And quite honestly, I don't know. Perhaps it's a naive question, but where do we go? Who is the next? to sign? And should we be encouraging them if they are sort of teetering on the edge? Sort of like writing to the heads of state or, you know, senior people.
John, would you like to answer that?
Yes, it's very important actually that we should encourage more states to sign for one reason in particular. If you look at the statements put out by the Permanent Five, by the nuclear powers, criticizing the treaty, quite consistently, from 3 or 4 years ago up until now, they all say the same thing. They say this treaty cannot become international customary law, and which shows the fact they repeat it all the time, shows how worried they are by the possibility that it will. I'm not an international lawyer, but you know, there's a basic principle which has been established in recent decades, I think really since the Second World War, that if enough states consistently observe a legal prohibition, this can pass into the area of customary law. And so the more states sign, of course, they've got to ratify it as well. And you say, how will we know? Well, this will appear on the treaty website. It won't be a problem at all. You can check now and see who has signed and who has ratified. The more people ratify as well, the more countries ratify as well as signing, the more embedded this becomes, and eventually should arguably, an argument which will be resisted, but should arguably become international customary law, not simply a treaty which only binds those people who have signed it.
Thank you, John.
Yeah,
Thank you. Perhaps we need to draw this to a close. Certainly in terms of informing ourselves, the ICANN website and the Don't Bank on the Bomb websites are particularly useful sources, in addition to the ones which have been mentioned in the course of the last hour or so. And there will be the addresses of various that have been mentioned would be in the chat also. Caroline, lastly.
Just quickly, I want to say there's been several mentions of things going into the chat box, and I haven't seen anything except the last two. So I just wonder what has happened with that.
Sally.
If you like, I can circulate the chat afterwards as a document to anyone who's been here, if you can give me your email address.
And how do we do that? Send it to Abingdon directly?
abingdonpeace@gmail.com.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And can I thank everyone for joining us tonight? The importance of connecting, and Zoom has given us so many opportunities for tapping into expertise that we've heard tonight from Bruce, from John, from our friends from America, Linda and Bucky, from Salisbury, Peter, information, inspiration to take us forward, both as groups, coalitions, and as individuals, to create that groundswell, that change of culture, which will move things forward. And thank you very, very much for contributions that anyone has made tonight, and all the best in our endeavours individually and collectively.